Hi everyone, this is Dr. Marks, and our topic for today is positive versus normative economic thought. Now, as you're going to learn, in the policy realm, we have to be able to think about both positive elements and normative elements. We can't escape that we have to think through both types of things. Let's get started. When you think about college courses, you're asked to do a lot of writing, and sometimes you're asked for your opinion. And when we ask you for your opinion, then the professor wants you to speak in the normative, right? So think about some of those position papers you've written or something about a highly controversial issue. How do you feel about abortion? What do you think about immigration, etc.? Very normative because we want your opinion. But other times, especially in economics, you're asked for some kind of analysis, and that analysis is based on data, observation, fact. And when we think about observations and being analytical and being objective, what we're thinking about is thinking positively. So we have normative thought, your opinion. We've got positive thought, things that are based on analysis, data, and observation. So let's start by thinking about positive statements, because as economists, we tend to understand those a lot better. When we think about positive statements or thinking about things in the positive realm, we're basing it on data. What does the data tell us? Economic theory. What does theory predict? Or some kind of economic model from which we can draw a conclusion. Generally, we can confirm whatever we're investigating using some kind of scientific approach. So we have some kind of generally accepted approaches to deciding how to do things in economics and applying theory. When we talk about things in the positive, it doesn't reflect any opinions or any value judgments from us. In this sense, it's completely objective. So positive statements are ones that are based on data, economic theory, economic models. We can confirm them using scientific methods. It doesn't involve opinions or value judgments. It's purely objective. For example, here's a good statement. In 2011, Longwood had its largest freshman class in the history of the university. Hopefully, it's clear to you that that's a positive statement. First, I can confirm it with data. I can subject this statement to testing to determine whether it's true or false. It's clearly not my opinion. And there's some generally accepted method of investigating validity. And by generally accepted, we would all agree on an approach for determining if this is true or not. So this is clearly a positive statement. Here's another statement. I might conclude that somewhere in my research, if gasoline prices rise, then airline travel prices will increase. All right. Well, again, this is something that is positive because I've concluded this based on economic theory, right? We've got this whole model of price of inputs going up and changing supply and driving prices up. So I'm simply applying basic economic theory here. So this is positive. So what am I applying here? As I said, I'm applying the ideas of supply. We know that gasoline is an input to production. And so when input prices go up, remember, this is a supply shifter. So supply is going to decrease. When supply decreases, this makes market prices increase. So again, everyone agrees that I've used basic economic theory and I've used it correctly to come up with a conclusion. So again, this is positive. I can further conclude that if airline ticket prices rise, then consumers will purchase fewer airline tickets. So again, I'm using a basic principle of economics. What principle am I using here? Well, obviously it's a law of demand, right? When prices rise, quantity demanded goes down, holding all else constant. So I'm simply applying the law of demand here. So again, the analysis that we're going through is clearly positive. There's no area open for interpretation. I'm not infusing my own viewpoints or opinions or values. So positive logic, when we think about writing in the positive, when we talk about applying positive thinking, positive logic includes things that can be confirmed with data, conclusions made from theory, so we're talking about basic economic principles and laws, conclusions generated from models, so maybe I get a conclusion from supply and demand or from the solo growth model that you're going to learn in some of your classes, or some of you already learned, and again, it's value-free and opinion-free. When economists evaluate policy, obviously we have to focus on the positive. A very important element of evaluating policy is figuring out, what does theory predict? What does economics suggest? We're usually, as economists, being asked for answers to questions. And so when we're asked for answers for questions, what are the impacts? How much will price go up? These are things for which we need to apply models. So a lot of what economists do is clearly positive. We are estimating things, we are forecasting things, and that is all positive. So we might be asked, what are the short-run implications of this policy? Well, that wouldn't be Dr. Marx's opinion, but kind of what does economics suggest would be the short-run implications if we go forward with this policy. Who are the winners? Clearly, some people will win from a policy change, but who are the losers? So economists might have to identify populations of people who will win under a policy and then who will be hurt under a policy. I might be asked what trade-offs are involved. So what do we gain and what do we give up when we implement this policy? Are costs going to increase or are costs going to decrease, and how much? What long-run impacts might need to be thought about? Are there any unintended consequences that we can think through? So these are all ways of thinking in the positive. Based on this kind of information, we might be able to decide if a regulation is a good idea or not. We might decide if a policy will have the intended effects. So we're implementing this policy because we're trying to achieve this outcome. Will we actually achieve that outcome or not? But then there are harder decisions that are not positive. So in a sense, positive stuff is the easy stuff, right? It's what we're trained to do. We have tools in our toolkit as economists. You guys who are going to be taking econometrics at some point, it's a really powerful tool that helps us generate really solid conclusions. Here are the things that are not so easy to think through. Is this policy fair? Is this justifiable? When we make this change and there are winners and losers, can we justify this? Is this policy worthwhile? Well, those are different. Hopefully you're thinking those don't sound very positive, because they're not. This is what we call normative. And things that are normative are not subjected to testing in the same way. They're not coming from economic theory. These are much harder for economists to answer. Normative statements are ones that involve a value judgment. That value judgment might incorporate the way we would like the world to operate. Or it might incorporate our perceptions of what is right and what is wrong. And we don't all have the same perceptions. Generally, when we talk about normative things, these are not testable using some scientific method, right? Because think about it. How can I test your opinion? How can I test your values or your judgment? I really can't. So we've moved out of the thing that we train you on, how to think positive, to think about how to have good normative discussions, and that's not so easy. For example, I might claim that Longwood should require all students to take a Principles of Economics course. Well, Hopefully you see that sounds very normative. What word jumps out at you as being highly normative? Well, hopefully the word should, right? Longwood should require this. Well, should is very opinionated. So clearly this is based on my own opinion. It's a value judgment that I have, and I can't test it. There's no way for me to test that this should happen. I'm not going to be able to prove that this is true. It's simply how I feel. If I had said the majority of four-year institutions require that students take a beginning economics course, well, that would be different. The majority of four-year institutions require that students take a beginning economics course. Do you agree that when I reword it that way, now it's positive? It's not my opinion, it's data, it can be confirmed, it's matter of fact, and it doesn't reflect the way I think the world should be. So clearly this is positive. So make sure you understand the difference between students should all be required to take a class. My opinion, the majority of four-year institutions require students to take econ. That's positive. Now, normative arguments are often tied to ethics. And what I mean by that, normative arguments are often tied to ethics, is that it's tied to this idea of what is right and what is wrong. It might incorporate the idea of fairness, and fairness is an ethical concept. So hard to measure fairness, hard for us all to agree what we mean by fairness. Your idea of what is fair might be different than my idea of what is fair. For example, is it fair that some people pay higher tax rates than others? Well, we may not agree to this. We might say, well, this is an ethical question. It depends on how you think the world should work. Some people think that everyone should pay the same tax rate. Other people think that people with high incomes should pay higher taxes and people with lower incomes should pay lower taxes. So you see what I'm getting at? If we're going to be talking about this, it's going to reflect our own judgments, what we bring to the table. So how do we think taxes should be divided? Evaluating policy requires both positive and normative thought. And in Econ 313, since this is a policy class, we're going to be looking at things from the positive, but we may also have some very normative discussions. And it's okay for you to bring your ideas of what you think to the table as long as you can then also talk in the positive. So let's consider some policy proposal XYZ, and it doesn't even matter what it is. Well, first, you estimate that some people will win and some people will lose. That's part of your job as an economist. Who will win? Who will lose? How much will people win? How much will people lose? Clearly, this is positive. You might calculate the gains and the losses. So I estimate that the winners will win by this much and the losers will lose by this much. Again, this is purely positive. But then we have to decide some things that are a little bit harder. Is this trade-off justifiable? We've got winners and losers. Can we justify helping out one population while hurting another? Is this fair? Can we defend this policy even though there's winners and losers? Do the benefits that are created justify these costs that are imposed on other people? Is this even an appropriate role for government? Maybe it's not. So these are normative questions, right? So what makes policy difficult is that after we think about the positive and we do our estimations and we predict the effects and we think about unintended consequences, now we have to have the normative discussion. We know the costs, we know the benefits, we know the trade-off. Can we justify it? Is it fair? Can we defend it? When we weigh benefits and costs, does it make sense to have this trade-off? Should government even be going in this direction? So normative thinking is going to come after we collect all of the positive information. We have to arm ourselves with good positive information to then have that normative discussion. sometimes the two approaches are going to merge, and we're going to see some of that. So here's an example. What if I want to learn about people's opinions about immigration? Well, if I'm asking about immigration, then I'm probably asking some normative questions. So maybe I ask people, do you think that there should be a border wall between the United States and Mexico? So should we build the wall? Well, that's kind of a normative question, right? It's not based on data and any kind of estimation. I'm asking your opinion. So I need to collect information, but I have to collect the information in a positive way. And what I mean by collecting information in a positive way is I have to do it in a way that doesn't reflect my own bias, right? I can't ask leading questions. I can't ask them in a way that says, given that immigrants have caused all these problems in our country, should we build a wall? If I ask a question like that, oh, given all the problems we have with immigrants, we should build a wall, right? That would be very biasing, and I don't feel that way, so don't quote me on that. I'm just using it as an example. But I have to ask questions in a way that doesn't reflect my own bias. So I have to use a well-constructed survey, and that survey has to be very objective and not have leading questions. So surveys are a positive approach to collecting information. And they're a positive approach because we can report the findings. We can say things like, 63% of the people surveyed think that we should build a wall or think that we should not build a wall. And this is a positive statement as I've written it because it's based on data. 63% of people surveyed think this. Well, that's just data collection, so it's positive, even though I'm asking a question that elicits normative responses, right? So if I'm being asked, do you think we should build a border wall? I might say, yes, I think we should build a border wall because I'm giving you my normative response, but when you turn it into a data set, it becomes positive. So I'm against this proposal or I am for this proposal because I feel it's wrong too. And I can start getting very philosophical, and that's very normative. But when you count the number of people who behave this way or answer this way versus that way, all of a sudden you've got positive data. Now, when it comes to policy, we've said that there are winners and there are losers. There are no policies where everyone wins. I would challenge you to come up with some kind of government policy where every single person is a winner. And I just don't think that you're going to find that. There are no policies like that. So normative thought's always going to come into play, right? If everyone won, then we don't have to get into the normative debate. But because there's winners and there's losers, that normative debate is always going to come into play. We're going to have to kind of duke it out to decide, does it make sense to do this? So we have to ask the normative and positive questions. So to summarize then, on the left, some things that would be positive: estimating costs, estimating benefits, recognizing trade-offs, determining who will win, determining who will lose, analyzing the impact on the economy, estimating the impact on budgets. You guys get the idea. They're all applying this theory, estimating this, analyzing that, determining, calculating. Where on the right, we've got normative types questions. Is this how we want the world to look? Is this fair? Can we justify this? Is the expenditure worthwhile? Is the trade-off acceptable? Do you agree that those things on the right are kind of fluffier questions when we think about economics? They're impassioned with our opinions and our value judgments and the baggage we bring to the table. Maybe you're somebody who's really in favor of more redistribution and you're trying to debate with somebody who doesn't believe in much redistribution. Well, now we're going to have a normative debate trying to get, these passionate pleas about, fairness and equity. So that's a much more difficult thing to achieve. Now, when you're writing papers, you generally want to write in the positive. Most of the time when you're asked to do a paper, you're being asked to write in the positive. Now, that doesn't mean you're simply asked to quote other people. If I ask you to prescribe a policy or evaluate a policy, I might be asking you to apply supply and demand, the idea of elasticity, thinking about unintended consequences, etc. And that's all applying economic theory and thoughts and models and those things that we do as economists. So they are positive. Unless you're asked to write a position paper based on your opinion. And sometimes you are asked for that kind of paper. Maybe you're asked to write a paper on your feelings related to abortion. That is going to be a normative paper. Now, can you write a positive paper about abortion? Yes, you can talk about numbers of abortions, health issues related to abortions. You can talk about the law related to abortions, and that is all positive. But when you're asked to write about your feelings, now it's normative. Or maybe you're asked to take a side on an issue, maybe some kind of normative thing, and then defend it using positive logic. That's a really challenging paper to write, but you get the idea. When you're writing, you might be asked to write in the normative, but most of the time, if you've not been told, you should be thinking in the positive. So, for example, suppose I'm writing a paper on welfare reform, and I say, welfare is a destructive force in our society since it creates laziness for some people. So again, welfare is a destructive force in our society since it creates laziness for some people. Well, this is clearly normative, right? It is kind of an opinion. And this might be okay if it's a position paper, but in economics we aren't usually looking for that kind of writing. If normative is not okay, given the assignment, then free frame what you're saying. So what I'm suggesting is as you find yourself writing a statement like that, reframe it. So I'm going to go back. Instead of some researchers, I'm sorry, I'm not going back. I lied. I can't make it work. So if normative is not okay, then reframe what you were saying. So the previous slide I was trying to show you said something about welfare is not good because it creates laziness in people. Well, what if I change it to this? Some researchers estimate that welfare reform has created some negative incentives for recipients. Do you see the difference here? So instead of saying welfare is a destructive force because it creates laziness, I'm saying some researchers estimate. The word estimate is positive. They estimate that welfare reform has created negative incentives. That versus laziness, negative incentives. Sounds a little bit more econ-y. We're applying theory rather than saying lazy, which is opinionated. So we can support this, right? How would I support this? I might give data, again positive. I could have conclusions based on models about how people respond to incentives, perhaps. I can summarize the analysis of others. You see where I'm going with this. As you write, look at your work and decide, have you been normative? And is it okay to be normative? And if it's not okay, you need to reframe what you're writing to be positive. Welfare spending has increased. That might be one of my points. I might say number of people on welfare has increased, and I can give data. I might say that surveys indicate that some portion of welfare recipients don't look for jobs. Again, this is data related. I might say economic theory suggests incentives are not well aligned, giving people disincentives to work. So you understand what I'm saying? This is being objective. This is taking a topic that's kind of heated and impassioned, and I'm making it objective. I'm making it positive. So the bottom line, for this class, you need to be able to distinguish between statements that are normative and positive. You need to be able to write in the normative when asked, and you need to write in the positive when asked. You need to be able to identify positive and normative elements of a policy. So if I give you a policy, I might ask you to have a normative discussion based on positive things that you have learned. But we need to recognize the normative issues that surround all policies and programs. At the end of the day, every policy that has been implemented, There has been a normative discussion about, is this fair? Is this ethical? Does this make sense? Understanding this distinction between positive and normative can help you not just in economics, but other classes as well, especially ones that require writing. Because you might find that you're writing in the normative when that's not really the appropriate way to address your topic. So for Econ 313, guys, we're going to be doing an assignment related to this. So it's important that you understand this discussion because you're going to be applying both positive economic logic and normative discussions to some policies. Let me know if you have any questions, and thank you for listening.